To another Agile Workplace Leaders webinar presented by AgilQuest. We're proud to bring you these educational lectures and panel discussions so your workplace plans benefit from leaders and innovators in the alternative workplace strategy arena. Those of you who have joined the webinars before know that they are not focused on our reservation management and measurement technology, but rather on the techniques and methods for making the most of your program, regardless of which vendor you choose. The exciting topic we have for today is collaboration, conversation, or chat, knowing the difference, and we are delighted to have a well-known expert speaker with us for the next hour. Namoi Stanford, PhD, is an expert in business strategy and organization design, including merging business units, relocating workforces, building internal organization design skills, restructuring head office functions, and developing healthy cultures. She joined NBBJ as their organization design director, where she advises and supports corporate and government clients in the United States, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Naomi has written several books, including The Economist's Guide to Organization Design, Organization Design, The Collaborative Approach and Corporate Culture, Getting It Right in Organizational Health. Her next book, Organization Design, Engaging with Change, comes out in December 2013. She authored the CIPD Toolkit Approaches to Change and has contributed to other books and toolkits. In addition, she supervises doctoral students in organization theory and speaks, writes, and teaches on many aspects of organization. Her blog, www.naomistanford.com, showcases her interests. With that, I'm going to pass control over to Naomi, who will lead us through her presentation.
Thank you, Terence. This is Naomi Stanford, and it's delightful to be working with AgilQuest on this webinar. And the conversation that I'm going to take you through, I'm going to try and make it collaborative so that we can experience together what collaboration is about. And clearly for a webinar, this is somewhat of a challenge, but let's have a go. Just a little bit about myself and how I came to be interested in collaboration. I do a lot of work around organizations, helping them to perform more effectively. And quite often I'm asked to create a culture of collaboration. And this is a very kind of demanding idea. How do you create a culture of collaboration? What is a culture of collaboration? How would we know it when we saw it? And what are the components that come into play as you're thinking about it? And these are the sorts of questions that we will look at today. What I'm going to cover is three ideas, and they're sort of they build on each other. The first idea is that collaboration means different things to different people. So although there are definitions of collaboration, and I'm going to work us through one of them and keep coming back to it, essentially how you think about collaboration differs from person to person, from organization to organization, from industry sector to industry sector. So it isn't a sort of single thing that you can identify. Secondly, there are multiple channels involved. And to make a collaboration effective, you're trying to choose the best channels for the outcome you're trying to get to. And clearly that, again, it depends on circumstance, context, and what have you. But multiple channels are part of the idea around collaboration. And the third idea, which I think organizations find more challenging than others, is that collaboration, the context for it is constantly changing, it's dynamic. So you never actually get to a culture of collaboration. And if you think back on the social media tools that have been coming on stream relentlessly for the last several years, they are all changing the way we collaborate. And there isn't any sign of that they're going to stop. The fact is that collaboration using these tools, the way we think about work, the places where we do work are all changing all the time. So how you think about collaboration in a dynamic context is also an interesting thing to reflect on. So for the next hour or so, 45 minutes, and then there's questions, I'm going to talk you through those three ideas and then think, okay, with these three ideas in mind, how can we actually enable collaboration? What do we in our jobs as project managers or workplace strategists or architects or what have you, what is it that we're thinking about as we help our clients and ourselves enable collaboration? So the first idea that I'm going to cover is that collaboration means different things to different people. And if you just take a look at these examples here, and we'll do them one by one. And here I would like you to put your answer in the chat box, so the top box on the right-hand side of your screen. You went to the coffee shop this morning. You asked for an iced cinnamon dolce soy chai tea latte dirty with 1 pump white mocha. Now, in your chat box, just write your response. Is that a collaborative exchange or not, in your view? Any responses on that? Just type in yes or no. No, okay. Anyone else? We have one no so far. No, okay. Product management, okay, good. Any others? Don't be shy about chatting in your chat box. Part of collaboration, you need people to participate. Okay, so nobody really so far thinks that the coffee shop exchange is a collaboration. So as you think about that, start to wonder why people are saying it's not a collaboration. And we'll come back to some ideas that people have around that. The second thing is your first meeting was about how to develop better supplier relationships.
Naomi,
the senior, yes.
Excuse me, sorry, this is Torrance. We did have some responses come into the Q&A section also.
Okay.
Some individuals did indicate that they did think that was an example of collaboration.
Okay. Right, we'll come back to that, but that's okay. Thank you. Thanks, Torrance.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll come back to that. So the number one was some people thought it was yes, some people thought it was no. Immediately you're getting the notion of the first idea that we're discussing, that collaboration means different things to different people. So that's rather interesting. So we're seeing it straight away. So if we look at example 2, your first meeting was about how to develop better supplier relationships. And there was a senior person present whose views were finally accepted. Is that a collaboration? Maybe. Yes. Yes, okay. So we've got some variations here. I don't know, Torrance, are you seeing any other views from yes or maybe? Closer than ordering a latte. That's a fun one. Okay. Maybe. Depends if a senior person is imposing his views. Okay, that's a very interesting point to make. So here we're getting some ideas around, again, what are the components of effective collaboration? So the idea that someone might be imposing his views, does that mean that the collaboration is effective? Okay, third example, your running group members, 6 people meet at 6 p.m. to go for a run. Today, some people thought it was too hot for running. You all agreed to go swimming. Is that a collaboration?
And there are some answers coming into Q&A that are
right.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. So as you think about those, and we've got, it's a stretch, but yes, okay, great. More of a collaborative decision. So people are beginning to think, as you're answering your question, answering these 3 little scenarios, are they collaborative? Hopefully some ideas are coming to mind about what is the nature of collaboration. The coffee shop one, what would make it a collaboration? And there are various components, and some people did think it was a collaboration here. The coffee shop one is a transaction. If you're the person who goes into the coffee shop, asks for that order, hands over the money, and then walks away. Almost you don't have to speak to the barista. Now, here's where the context becomes important. If you know the barista, you go in there every day, and there's some context around this, and she's or he's recommending that particular thing because yesterday you tried it out, at their recommendation, and you've asked for it again, then it starts to become a little bit more collaborative. So you think about the context of the exchange. Is it transactional? Is it transformational? The second one about the meeting with the supplier, the person who typed in that it's a, depends if someone is imposing their views, again, in your own mind, as you think about collaboration, are you thinking they are essentially equal exchanges? Does everybody have the same voice? At what point does an exchange become a controlling device or a manipulation or a coercion? And the third one, you can start to wonder if you all agreed to go swimming, that at some point in that context, there would maybe have been some to and fro. People may have suggested other things, but eventually everybody agreed. And again, depending on the context, this is quite possibly a collaboration. So that's the first idea coming into play, that it means different things to different people, and you can see it as we worked through those three examples. If I now present a definition, what is collaboration? And as I said earlier, there are lots of definitions. But this one I like because it has the idea that it's a beneficial relationship. And so you can see that in some contexts, the barista one could potentially be a beneficial relationship. She may have made a recommendation, you've handed her the money or him, etc., etc. Between two or more people working together towards common goals. And the common goals are important if you start to think about collaboration. So the swimming example or the running one, the common goal is to take some exercise. The supplier relationship is to develop the better relationships with the supplier. Not sure that there's a common goal in the coffee example except to hand over a cup of coffee, and you could, some people or I even could argue that that was a common goal. And achieving results, sharing knowledge and responsibility for achieving results. Now the whole achieving results thing is interesting because results can be emerging. And the common goals can be emerging. The goal can be directional. So a directional goal in the running versus swimming one might be, it's too hot for running, what can we do instead as exercise? So it's directional. You're not leaping straight into the notion of swimming. So that idea that the results and the goals can be emergent keeps the whole notion of collaboration as a dynamic process. Sorry, Terence.
Yeah, Naomi, I was just going to remind all of our attendees today, first of all, excellent participation during that those questions, and ask that as they have questions that they would like to pose to you, to go ahead and send them to us now. We will hold the questions until the end, but please send us the questions through the Q&A or through the chat, and we'll pose them to Naomi at the end.
Great, thank you, Terence. Another idea around collaboration, if you take these 3 points, that it's beneficial relationships, common goals, and achieving results, what are the results? And as they emerge, often you find in effective collaboration that you're getting new ideas, that you're getting more of them, and they come faster than in a more transactional relationship. So you're looking for more, faster, and new as you think about collaboration. But that, again, that isn't always the case, but typically that is the sort of thing that happens. So as I think about collaboration, I'm thinking about those 3 things, and I'm now going to present 2 examples which are illustrative. And they're very different, so you start to see that the context for collaboration gives very, very different outcomes. The first one is this, I find absolutely fascinating, Encoded Textiles project. And here you have this incredible mesh of technology, information, people, and place. And the quote here, technology tends to have us communicate with each other, but it doesn't always connect us with each other, is one of the important things to think about collaboration. It's more of a connection than a transactional communication. So going back to the coffee example, that could be simply a communication, a request for coffee. It isn't necessarily a connection, although if we knew more about the context, it could be. This Encoded Textiles project, if you look at the picture, you'll see what looks like QR codes in tapestry. And that, amazingly, is exactly what they are. The QR codes, if you go into the museum where they're on display, if you click on the QR code that is woven into the tapestry, you get stories of Arizona's Navajo people. And this is the way this project is working. It's a collaboration between university students, the faculty members at Arizona State University, and Arizona's Navajo people. The students are interviewing the people about their lives and their culture. They're telling their stories in their native language. And then the technology translates the interviews and then converts them into barcodes, which then QR codes them. So you have a tremendously complex set of interactions, but you can see back to the definition of collaboration that it is beneficial because they're telling the stories of the Navajo Indians. The students are benefiting from the whole mesh of those technologies and possibilities. Faculty is benefiting from the relationships between the two. There's a common goal: how do we get these stories more accessible out into the world, the legacy and history of the Navajo people codified, and the results are there. You can see them in physical format in the woven tapestries. So that's example one of a very, very well orchestrated collaboration. Example two, which is one I'm currently involved in, is setting up a hot desking experiment in our own organization. And the piece of the collaboration I'm going to talk about is simply the setup phase of it. And this has involved multiple people again. What we were trying to do was test out for ourselves various formations around hot desking. Should the hot desks be clumped together in one sort of unit? Should they be interspersed with teams? How would we feel about joining a team that wasn't our team, et cetera, et cetera? Now, what we've discovered as we started to set this up, there have been several conversations around those sorts of questions, and we've now got a setup where the project is, this is week 3 or 4 of the project. We've involved, initially we started to think it could just be a handful of people who would give up their desk. What we then started to realize that it would involve IT in helping us set up a standard format for the desk so that people got the same equipment as they move from one to another. It would mean the office services people getting involved as they helped us make sure the desks were suitable, that they were advertising what desks were available, et cetera, et cetera. It involved the finance function around some of the decisions around could we buy some extra equipment that we needed, and those sorts of things. And it involved telling the people who we were going to be working with, our colleagues who were not hot desking, what the hot desking experiment was all about and why we were doing it. And you can see that this sort of thing has involved a lot of interactions, and it's involved technology. The interesting thing for me is that the hot desking experiment is taking place in Seattle, and I am living in Washington, D.C. So the whole experiment I'm orchestrating with my colleagues in Seattle mediated through technology. And that, again, is another way of thinking about collaboration. How do you mediate it through technology, and how are you thinking about which technologies are more or less suitable for it? Again, this hot desking experiment in its setup phase is a good example of a collaborative project. It's benefiting the organization in all sorts of ways. It has the common goal of trying out different forms of hot desking, and the idea is achieving results that we can share with our clients. So those two experiments are two good examples. Those two examples are good ones around collaboration. So just pausing for thought for a moment, the idea one is that collaboration means different things to different people. So as we've talked through the 3 examples in the first off, the coffee shop, the supplier relationships and the running group. And then I've shown you two examples, the encoded textiles and the hot desking, plus the definition of beneficial relationships. Just think about your own day so far and tell people through the chat box or the Q&A box, have you collaborated today? And if you can give some little piece of information around that, that would be helpful. Okay, so we're getting some questions, some answers here. You're thinking about your morning, have you engaged in a collaboration? Some people, yes, good. Through conversations, okay. Getting children off to camp, wonderful. I can imagine that collaboration. Yes, lots of calls where multiple people were adding insights, ideas, opinions, and facts. Very good. So lots of people are thinking about how their day so far. Some people have had what they feel are collaborative interactions. Some people haven't.
And Naomi, in the Q&A section, we had a person chime in saying that they were collaborating this morning on a video conference.
Oh, brilliant. Good.
Yep.
Good. So again, and we've got one here saying through multiple requests as vendors involved, and we've got one saying yes through email. So you can see again the range of possibilities for collaboration with your thoughts on what it involves. So if we move on to idea 2, and we've seen it already, there are multiple channels involved. And this is, again, fascinating because you have a lot of choice in how you think about the channels. If we look at these 4 pictures, and they're rather different, picture 1, the top left-hand one, is a face-to-face interaction with some physical documents. So here you have people looking together over something. And this essentially is more or less a standard conventional social interaction potentially. Obviously, we don't know what they're saying, but they look kind of happy and involved. If you look at the top right-hand column, here, picture, here you've got somebody, it could be in a hotel lobby, it could be in an office, we're not quite sure where it is. And that person is looking at his computer. Now, he may be on Skype, he might be on a video conference, he might be working through email, as someone suggested earlier that they've been collaborated through email. But you can see it's one person and one technology device here. So again, you're thinking about, and you're looking at a very different place. If you look at the place involved, the 2 women talking to each other at a desk, and at a desk sitting down. The man with here is sitting in an easy chair, feet on the table, no desk in sight. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, another very interesting thing that's coming into play now is these avatars in the workplace. And here you've got 3 people face-to-face, and one person is an AnyBot. Now, the AnyBots are mobile avatars. So if it was me, I could have one of these AnyBots in Seattle office and be essentially walking around the office, and people would be able to interact with me through the screen and my face there. Now, if you start to think about that form of collaboration, it creates a very different social dynamic. How do people feel interacting with essentially a robot, even if it's being controlled by a human? What effect does it have on the actual workplace? How do these robots move around the organization? How do they collaborate around or talk to each other or chat around a coffee machine, for example? So that sort of thing that is coming increasingly to the workforce adds a very different form of collaboration into the mix. If you look at the 4th photograph, here you've got a telepresence sort of video conferencing thing. Now look at the dynamic there. Again, people in the room. and one person on the screen. Now, we don't know if the person on the screen can actually see what's going on in the room, and sometimes people can't. So although in this photo everyone is looking at the man on the screen, in fact, they could also be talking to each other or sharing pieces of paper that the man on the screen can't see, although he's talking with them. So the way you're thinking about collaboration to make it beneficial helps you to start thinking through which of these is the most beneficial form of channel to choose for the collaboration outcome we're trying to get to. Once you start to think about this, and you've got some mixes here of social, informational through the technology and through talking to each other, and spatial, you can start to look a little bit more at the space element for those of us who are in workplace design and physical space. And the workplace is important. The way that people are set up within their workplace makes a big difference to the amount of collaboration that can happen, which is in fact part of what our hot desking experiment is going to try and work out. There is a certain amount of research that suggests that round tables are more effective for collaboration than long tables and that sort of thing. We know quite a lot about focus space and collaborative space, although there is a sort of tendency to think of collaborative space as soft seating. But as you start thinking about the space and you think about the types of collaboration that you're typically involved in, and the technologies that you're using and the people that you're talking with, those channels become important choices for us working in this workplace design arena. Just thinking about the channels, think for yourself today of the channels that you've used. List in your chat box any other channels for collaboration that you've used or can think of. Sorry, this should say collaboration that you can use or think of that we haven't mentioned. Any others? Texting, good. Telephone. Instant messaging, wikis, yep, great.
And someone put out Facebook. There's lots of
Facebook,
stuff.
good. Yes, I was waiting. I was waiting for Facebook to come.
Yep.
Excellent. Now, that sort of Facebook, social media, LinkedIn communities, those sorts of things are another interesting form of collaboration because they're asynchronous and they're essentially text-based. If you think about, I don't know if any of you are participating in the MIT hackathons. There's one going on now about making HR more effective or having a different view of HR. And that essentially is a very well-run collaboration, and it's worth looking at if you don't know it. But it's all online. There's no face-to-face social interaction, and it's asynchronous. People are adding in different time points to it. It's, yes, what's it called? It's called the MIT. It's called a mixed hackathon. I'll send it out after the event with the email that comes to participants. So for people who didn't hear the, I don't have the website to hand here. So now you're thinking that there are various channels and they needn't be face-to-face and they could be asynchronous. So that's another level of complexity added into the mix of collaboration. So what we've covered so far is that collaboration means different things to different people, that multiple channels are or could be involved in effective collaboration. And now we're going on to the third idea, that the context for collaboration is dynamic. And this is another thing to bear in mind. You don't reach a point where everybody is collaborating, where we can say, yes, we're a collaborative culture, or yes, this workplace layout is exactly right for collaboration. Because if you start to think about the context, again, it's quite complex, but there's a graphic here that starts to look at the trends around the context for collaboration. This graphic came from a very nice report from the Institute for the Future. It was compiled last year in 2012. If you look at the solid boxes like extreme longevity, computational world, superstructured organizations, those are the drivers that will reshape the workforce landscape. The one that I find most fascinating in the types of work that I do is around the superstructured organizations, because one of the points about organizations is that they themselves are changing, which impacts the way people think about collaboration. So, for example, are your suppliers part of your collaborative relationship? Are contractors who work in your office part of your organization or not? And there are no clear-cut answers to a lot of these questions. Other trends that are affecting collaboration, the globally connecting world, and that is critically important when you're thinking about how to collaborate across national borders, across time zones, different cultures, etc., etc. Because different national cultures have different ways of thinking about things. And just in a workplace idea, I just came across some research, not specifically to do with collaboration, about the way that lobbies in different countries are very different. Spanish lobbies to offices are rather ornate, and Swedish lobbies are rather Spartan. So there was a sort of immediate visual difference here. If you start to look in the rings on this converging trends, you can see there's one that actually specifies the word collaboration around virtual collaboration. And the people who mentioned Facebook or Google Plus or whatever are well into this idea that collaboration can be virtual and asynchronous. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. And again, this has colossal workplace implications. And I've noticed again that the conventional mode of thinking about collaboration is face-to-face. It doesn't have to be. It can be a mix of face-to-face right through to partly technologically or informationally based, right through to totally virtual. So as we think about collaboration, think about that. It involves new media. And each media trend that comes in, or each media platform, requires people to think about, is this useful for collaboration? And a question that I got yesterday on this topic, as I was thinking about this with some colleagues, was how do we know which media are suitable for collaboration? What can we adopt and try out that we think will advance collaboration? What would make it beneficial? So those are quite useful questions to start thinking about. If we move on from the trends, and clearly trends are trends, they're dynamic themselves. So perhaps if we saw from the Institute of the Future the 2013 map, it would look slightly different. So keeping an eye on these trends is tremendously important as you think about enabling collaboration in your workforce. There's some work that's just come out by Cisco talking about the new collaborative workplace, and they suggest that the workplace will be mobile, which they describe as that users can use the workspace no matter where they are or where they go or when they go there. So the notion that workspace can be physical or virtual is an interesting one. They describe it as social communication moving beyond the one-to-one to many-to-many to capture the power of the social networking. Or they describe it as visual, so that the video communications, and we saw that in the two photographs there, can help tell the stories. And I don't know if you've noticed that PowerPoints are becoming increasingly visual and increasingly less text dense and much more virtual. So that you can get services and operating systems reliably delivered through intelligent networks that connect all the devices that people use. So just pausing there, as you think about the workplace, if you could just type into your chat box, where are you as you participate? In what location? At my desk, at home, desk, home office, home on the couch, good. Office at desk. Okay, so office meeting room, right. Workspace in office. Anyone in an airport or on a train or in a bank lobby or anything like that? One of the things I've discovered in my mobility is that bank lobbies are rather quiet if you're trying to take a telephone call, so that's interesting. Okay, so we can see that where people are predominantly at home or in an office workspace or at a desk or in an office meeting room. So again, you can immediately see the variety of contexts that people are sitting in terms of space and participation mode. So here we've now reached the end of the 3 ideas. So I'll just recap on the 3 ideas, that collaboration is different things to different people, multiple channels, and the context is changing and dynamic. And we're looking in collaborative exchanges around beneficial relationships, common goals, and achieving results. So moving on from that positioning, how do we actually do this? How do we take ourselves into a collaborative mode? What are the types of things we need to do to enable collaboration? And we've touched on several of them. The first sort of thing is to think about it in 3 dimensions, a spatial dimension, which can be either physical or virtual, but definitely you're thinking about what is a spatial dimension around this collaboration. The second dimension that you're thinking in is a social collaboration. Is it one-to-one, many-to-many, small groups, big groups, et cetera, et cetera? Do they know each other as in an office, or are they doing it through a LinkedIn community where they've never met each other? So what is the social setting? And informational, what information is coming to the participants? How are they receiving it? Through what devices, through what media channels, et cetera, et cetera. So as you think about collaboration in a workplace setting, and for those of us who are workplace strategists, workplace designers, project managers, thinking about how we mesh those 3 to get of spatial, social, and informational, to get a workplace that supports new patterns of collaboration and emerging patterns of collaboration becomes a very important consideration. It's not enough to just think social, a culture of collaboration. It's not enough to just think spatial, collaborative spaces. It's not enough to just think informational. You have to think of all 3. And that means that essentially establishing and enabling collaboration involves multifunctions within the organization. It involves spatial thinking. So if you are in a corporate real estate or facilities or workplace design role, the spatial stuff, you're thinking about the density of people, how close are they to each other, what are you layering into the system in terms of technologies, that type of thing. Analog information, digital information. How are you zoning people? Are there clumps of hot desks? Are there special areas for quiet, reflective work, et cetera, and the role in collaboration? How do you stay in flow when you're in motion? And this sort of question is interesting. How do you stay in touch with colleagues? How do you find colleagues when they're not in the workplace, but you want to carry on the collaboration with them? So you're trying to make it easy for people to find each other in order to carry on the conversation. The second thing is the HR function. And you can think about HR in terms of organization development, the culture of the organization. What things are you doing to develop the trust and respect? And if you think back to the example early on in this presentation where there was someone whose views seemed to dominate in the end, the second example, how would you make sure that everybody trusted and respected each participant to have an equal voice? Policies are important around helping collaboration. There's a whole notion that's coming into play, which I think will probably have a quite significant effect on collaboration, of leaders everywhere. So it's not a hierarchical notion around collaboration. It is a everyone can be a leader in their appropriate circumstances. People need to have multi-channel communication skills, and we've all heard the stories. I heard one the other day, actually, of a senior person who still wanted to have his emails printed out before he would read them. And then fostering a learner, not a judger environment. Again, that's a sort of cultural thing. How do you become learners with asking open questions rather than judges? This won't work. And then the whole informational function around IT, of data, transparency, the tools. And there are some interesting tools around mapping existing collaboration patterns. I don't know if you've come across organizational network mapping, and then some sociometric badging. There was a useful article in HBR a couple of months ago on sociometric badging, which is tracking patterns of interaction both as people walk around space and picking up their voice tones, how they're speaking to each other. Policies again around IT, and we've seen increasing emphasis on bring your own devices, that sort of thing, which all changed the dynamic around collaboration. And then the finance and the business functions have to be involved. There are financial decisions to be made around effective collaboration and business decisions. So that sort of enablement is pretty key as a multifunction notion. Essentially, to develop collaboration, you have to be collaborative with your other functions. And I think that's a useful notion to bear in mind by modeling collaboration as you try to embed it or implement it. It gives you the practice of how to do it. The final thing I would like to give you is some tips around enabling, and there are 7 here. They relate back to what we were saying about the different ideas. First of all, define what collaboration is for your organization. Is it always about beneficial relationships, about common goals, about achieving results? And how would you phrase that in the language of your organization, or change those dimensions if they weren't applicable? What behaviors would be demonstrated? Are you expecting everybody to trust and respect each other? Is it okay for the senior person's views to be taken on board in the end? Who is going to take ownership for various things, and how do you delegate tasks? And in the example I gave you about the hot desking experiment that we're doing, we have been setting out who's going to do the desk formatting, who's going to clean their desk, that sort of thing. Thinking through the communication strategies. Now that's important as you start to think about what do we mean by collaboration, how are we going to embed it, how are we going to talk to people about it. Then the contributions and expectations, what do we expect from people. The relationships as well as the work. What is the work of the collaborative project or the collaborative exchange, and what are the relationships involved? And the common goals that I mentioned at the very beginning. So just to summarize, those collaboration tips will sort of pilot you down the road. In order to help you with number 1, defining what collaboration looks and feels like, we will be sending out a tool which is a sort of diagnostic tool to help you answer that question for your organization. So that will be coming subsequent to this webinar. What we've covered today then is that it means different things to different people, multiple channels, a dynamic context, and then some ways of enabling it through multifunction support. So I'm going to hand it over to Torrance to pick up any of your questions.
Thank you, Naomi. I do have some questions that have come in that I'd like to pose to you, and I'd just like to remind everyone who's joining us today that they can go ahead and send their questions to us either through the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll pick those questions up and pose them to Naomi as well. These are in no particular order. They're just the order in which they've come in for me. So I would like to ask you, Naomi, why do we need to consciously build a culture of collaboration? Why can't it just happen naturally in the workplace?
That is a very, very good question, which makes me laugh because it's something that I often wonder myself. And I think that in my experience, it's because there is a clash between hierarchical or tension more than a clash, tension between hierarchical organizations which are thinking in I tell people what to do as a sort of command and control notion versus the tools and techniques of social interaction which are becoming increasingly prevalent in the workforce. So in order to have collaboration, it requires at some levels people giving up the notion of hierarchies and command and control.
Okay. The next question is almost a part two to that first question. Assuming that we're going to invest in this, the time and money that it takes to build that culture, how do we measure the improvements that come from collaboration?
Yeah, and that is a real challenge because a lot of these collaborative things are knowledge workers. And measuring knowledge worker productivity and outcome is tremendously difficult. And I don't know if you've been looking at these experiments around the results-only work environment, that sort of thing, where people have been trying to do that. If you look at this MIT hackathon, I think that's an interesting example where there will be results because they will be able to produce a white paper, recommendations, support mechanisms around this notion that of this particular hackathon of making things HR more, a different form of HR. And I think by thinking through what you're looking for as an outcome of the collaboration is an important thing. So you've got a direction and a flow. And then going back to the notion of more ideas, more quickly and faster, those sorts of things you can start to track. Are we getting more ideas than we had previously? And you're looking at what was there before compared with what can be in the future. But it is a very difficult topic, and that is one of the things we're looking at in our own hot desking experiment of how we would measure the difference between a collaborative culture and a, for the sake of argument, less collaborative or non-collaborative culture.
Okay. There are a few questions that have come in around hoteling, hot desking, mobility, that kind of thing. And I will point out before I raise the next question that this presentation will be available as a recording on our website, and all attendees will receive a link to that. And I'll mention that again in the wrap-up, but there have been some questions about that as we've moved through. So that's great. People want your slides and information. The questions around hoteling and hot desking, mobility, when you introduce mobility into the workplace, how does that impact collaboration? You talked about finding people and so forth. How does mobility impact collaboration?
It has, in my view, an experience, and I'm working with 2 companies now in this, a significant difference. It impacts because people have their prior relationships fractured in some way. So if you're used to sitting next to person A and you're then moving into a mobile environment where you might not see that person in the same way, you're then having to change your habits and patterns and behaviors to accommodate that difference. So it disrupts social relationships, and to some extent people have to learn or relearn how to establish social relationships in a different way. Now, that isn't necessarily difficult, and you can think of people who, readily adapt to having conversations on Facebook or whatever. It's just a question of thinking through, if you're doing it for the whole workforce, what impact is it going to have? Is anything getting fractured? How do we help people think through what differences are going to happen? And I think a good way is practicing. And we've done several experiments in companies that I've worked with in the past where we've tried out various things before it actually happens. So rather than wait till the day of the office move or the new furniture coming in or whatever it is, you sort of simulate. And in one office that I worked with, we shut down the whole office for a week. And everybody had to work from home, and we were tracking what was going on. Did the IT help desk hold up? Did people communicate with each other? Were they able to use instant messaging, et cetera, et cetera? And it was a fairly low-risk thing because they, if on day 2 it was a dismal failure, they could have all come back into the office. But in fact, they didn't, and we learned a tremendous amount from that. So doing some tryouts in a contained environment, a safe environment, is a very helpful way of finding out how it does impact.
Sure, and I would guess that the technologies that have emerged, particularly the collaborative technologies, have helped in that area as well.
That's right, yes, and the instant messaging, things like Link and that type of thing, they do allow people to stay involved and interacting with each other. Again, I've seen some very good examples of that being used where you set up an online community leader who's got a specific organizational role. And interestingly, people who work solely with virtual teams have got very adept at staying in touch. It's often more effectively than face-to-face supervisors and managers because they're using the technology in a very, very interactive way to keep the conversations, the chats, and the sort of more intentional collaboration going.
Mm-hmm. There's a question that kind of dovetails to that came in, which is, should companies be prescriptive in methods of collaboration, or should it evolve and let people choose their methods?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am not a great fan of prescription because I think people work out their own methods. The issue then is around organizational policies. So, for example, are there policies around security and confidentiality of information? And I think if you're following that bring your own device sort of ongoing debate, that's kind of an issue. So what I usually suggest to organizations I work with is that they set a framework, and then you get that, again, a sort of rather cliched phrase, but freedom within a framework. Here's the framework that we want you to operate within, but within that you can collaborate as you wish. And I think that those sorts of fairly relaxed but with clear guidelines rather than prescriptions work most effectively.
In terms of collaboration, is video worth the cost? Or can you do the same thing with phone calls and instant messengers?
Well, that's another good question. And that's one I've been pondering, not so much in terms of video, but the video piece comes into it, is how many face-to-face interactions should you have to keep a collaboration going if you're in a sort of office organization rather than a completely virtual organization? And even for completely virtual organizations, is there merit in meeting up occasionally? And I have been with organizations who, for example, won't let people work from home until they've been with the organization for 6 months and got to know the culture of it. So there is a question around what are face-to-face interactions important for establishing that trust and rapport in initial conversations, which can then develop into collaboration? Does video act as a proxy for that, or can you do a face-to-face and then video works perfectly well? Because with video, you're picking up some visual clues, which you're not picking up by voice only. So I think it's a sort of continuum and depends on the context.
Sure, sure, and it's interesting. I know I saw it go through in the chat earlier. Someone brought up the point about particularly dealing with other cultures and people who may not have English as a first language, the challenge of trying to collaborate asynchronously in text, and the fact that you lose that tone and how important the tone is to the conversation and the collaboration.
Right, and that I once worked with a client and where exactly that was happening, and I was asked to go in and sort of help them think it through, and it turned out that the issue on that, it was quite a number of years ago. They were a multi-European group, so different European countries. They were all communicating through English via email, but none of them had English as their own first language. And what they were doing was interpreting the text in very different voice tones than the voice tone intended. And that's where the voice is important, and potentially the face-to-face meetup, so that people can get to know each other better, which clearly is not always feasible. So having the set of skills around of open questions, and I mentioned the learner, not judger mentality and attitudes, by saying, rather than leaping into, I don't like what that person said, is I wonder what he or she meant, is a useful sort of set of skills to have around that learner mentality rather than the judger mentality.
Okay, I've got time just for one or two more questions. The first one that I have that has come in, which is, what are the typical apprehensions or fears or the areas of resistance that you see as organizations try to embrace a culture of collaboration? Right.
Well, quite often there are ideas that people, and that to some extent they're bound up with, particularly in space terms. If people have been used to having a private office and they're now being asked to work in open space, what are now called collaborative environments, they're incredibly nervous about losing their private office. And I do think it's interesting that we talk a lot about collaboration and we talk less about reflection. So how do we get the balance of collaborative space where people can interact with each other and reflective space? The other thing that I've met, not in advance of the thing, but as collaboration takes a hold, is this feeling that you're always having to be in some collaborative conversations or interactions, that you don't get time to switch off. And that sort of thing about always on is very interesting. And the people who say they were collaborating through email, all of us have experienced, you know, this constant deluge of email. So those apprehensions are, they're not necessarily in advance, but they arise as collaboration and the way people interact with each other, and you start to think about the context and the beneficial relationships and the common goals. Those are not always in sync, which also causes some differences and difficulties.
Okay. Before I ask the last question, I know we're running up against the hour here, but there's someone who asked about steps to start a mobility program, and I'd just like to point out that we actually have a webinar on our website similar to this that was specifically focused on starting mobility programs. So if that person would like to reach out to AgilQuest, we can point you to that. Last question before we do wrap up. How do you bring newcomers into the collaborative process that you've established?
Yes, and that's another good question. What I have done in the past is match them or help them find someone who they have got a rapport with, either a virtual rapport or a face-to-face rapport on a buddy system, so that they can see how it is working in practice. And then you're gradually bringing people into that, helping them think it through, you know, helping them see where their strengths are in their particular choices of technology to use, how they retrieve information, how they interact with people. And often you can support that with good policies and information. So things like, if you're in a virtual meeting where everybody is working towards a common goal, what are the sort of meeting protocols you have to follow, and that can be a simple checklist, you know, make sure everybody on the line has had a moment of speech, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're at time, so on behalf of everyone on the call today, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with us, and I'd also like to thank all of our attendees for participating. In the interactive section, I think that went really well. Lots of feedback as we went through there. Today's webinar has been recorded, and you will receive a link in your email so you can share today's excellent presentation with other people in your organization. So be sure to watch your email inbox for the link and for details on next month's Agile Workplace Leaders Series, which is going to be Workplace Transformation, Integrating IT, HR, and Real Estate, with Kira Kavanaugh from Life Meets Work. Thanks again from all of us here at AgilQuest, and thank you particularly Naomi, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Thanks to everyone for participating.